All right. Thank you, Callie. Well, I know all of you out there are super excited today to talk about your favorite topic, which is budgets. I've done this presentation to a lot of you over the past couple of years, and we keep doing it because we think it's a very important topic. It directly affects people's property taxes. It affects what your entity is spending your money on. And I know a lot of you today are city auditors, county auditors, financial professionals. So if you're like me, you like working with numbers. You like playing around with them. You might like doing some forecasting. My wife thinks I'm a little crazy. I do have an annual budget set up for us at our own home. I update it every month, but I also have it set up for the next 30 years. The good thing is for you guys today, we only have to worry about 1 year, not 30 years. I know a lot of you are in that budget cycle right now, and it can be a pretty stressful period. So what my hope is for you, even if you've heard this presentation before, is that you pick up on something that you may have missed in the past, or better yet, you can now say, hey, we do that now. And that's really my hope for any of you that haven't heard this presentation before, is that you can take this information and run with it with your organization. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the goals of the budgeting process, talk about various budgeting laws that may affect your organization, go through the budget file that's on our website, and then talk about some various deficiencies that we've seen over the years and give you a couple of tips and tricks when you're doing your budget. So with that, I'll get into the goals of the budget. One, you want to make sure that your budget is set up so that you're meeting the needs of your stakeholders. For myself, that's pretty easy. The needs are my family. What kind of lifestyle do we want to live? How we're going to pay for that? What kind of revenue streams do we got coming in? For you, it's a little bit more hectic for sure when you're talking about an organization the size of a county or a city or a school district, but your stakeholders are going to be those citizens in your community, the commissioners that are running your organization. What is it that they want to provide to the taxpayers? So you want to make sure that your budget, when you're setting that up, accurately reflects the needs of those individuals. Second thing is that you're going to want your budget to be supported. Whether that's because me as the auditor, when I come in, I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to want to make sure I see some kind of documentation of how you came up with those estimates. But more importantly, if you have citizens come into your budget hearings, they're going to be the ones asking questions. Why did you spend so much, or why are you budgeting to spend so much on this? And you're going to want to be able to tell them and show them, hey, here's our historical data. This is what we've done in the past. This is what we see from various estimates that we've been getting in. This is what we're going to budget for this year. Last thing, and this is just to make sure you're not getting into trouble with anything, is that your budgets are in compliance with the various laws and regulations that are out there. There are quite a few. Today's presentation is mostly based on county century codes, but I am going to throw in some tweaks in there for those of you who might be a city or a school district, because there are, this topic could be talked about forever. So I'm going to try to hammer it down to those key points that we want you guys to take away from this so that you can implement that into your budget process. So the first budgeting law deals with the county auditor preparing budgets. And for them, you're going to want to prepare a budget for your general fund, for your debt service fund, and for each of your special revenue funds. So if you have a road and bridge fund, you're going to want to make sure you're creating a budget for that fund. If you have a weed control fund, same concept. Those funds, the budget that you're going to prepare for that has to be in the form prescribed by the state auditor, by our office. Is it out where you need to have basically a 3-year period within the budget that you're doing. So if you're budgeting for 2024 here, this July coming up in August, you need to have that finished by. You're going to look at what were our actual numbers from last year. You're going to put those into your budget. You're going to have your current amounts that you're in this year. you'll put those amounts in your budgets, and then you're going to estimate what you're going to do for the ensuing year, and that's the year that we're actually budgeting for. And not only do you need to have those 3 years worth of information, you need to have the revenues, the expenses for each of those periods, and they need to be in some form of detail. So you don't want to just lump everything together and say, hey, we had $1 million of total revenue last year. You really want to break that out so that people can see what it is that you're really budgeting for. You'll budget for your transfers in and out. So you'll have those actual transfers in and out from last year in your budget, and you might have a good idea this year. As of July, you might know, hey, our transfers in and out are going to be this and this for this current year. So we might update those amounts. One thing with the current year amounts, you can use what you put in your budget last year because that was really your estimate. The current year amounts are considered estimates. Now we're halfway through the year, so you might have a lot better estimates than what you did at your budgeting period last time, but you are able to still use those amounts, and that's going to be supported. But if you want to update those to more accurately reflect what you think is currently going on, just make sure that you update your forecasts and that you have support for those new estimates that you're going to put into that current year column. With that, you're going to put your beginning and ending fund balance, because your beginning and ending fund balance is going to directly drive really what your beginning balance is going to be for the beginning of next year. And that's your resources that you currently have to start the year. So that's going to affect what your property tax collections could end up being. So that's a very important piece of the budget, is making sure you put those beginning and ending fund balances into your budget. One other thing on here is your cash reserve. This is kind of there's a piece in Century Code called the interim fund. It intertwines with this language of cash reserve, which just means that you can have a little money set aside at the end of next year. It's just there is a limit of 75% of your current appropriations. And the reason for that is so that you aren't just growing your fund balance by collecting property taxes and not spending it down. You're continuing to collect property taxes, your fund balance are going up and up and up, but you're not utilizing those property taxes to really meet the needs of your stakeholder. So there is that 75% rule in there. There's a few other requirements in 112302. One of them is just that you want to make sure that your budget is prepared on the same basis of accounting as your normal annual financial statements. That budget is going to end up having how much property tax you're going to levy. When I get to our budget file that I'll be talking about here in a little bit, that file does have that information in it. So if you do end up using the actual file that we have on our website, that's all going to be right there for you. So that's always my biggest recommendation, is just start with that file. You can always modify it a little bit, but go and start with that file. The next Century Code that we're going to talk about here is 571531. And this one really deals with all of you who are levying property taxes. It's not just for counties, it's not just for cities. It's really going to be for any entity that's levying a property tax. And this Century Code just helps you calculate how much property tax you're going to need. That way you're not just going to your county auditor and saying, hey, I want you to levy the max mills. There's really a calculation that you should be doing in order to come up with that amount. And that calculation comes from your budget. So if you had budgeted your expenses, you're going to take that total amount of expenses, add to that cash reserve piece that we talked about. That's going to end up being your total estimated expenditures and cash reserve. That's kind of going to be, hey, here's all the expenses that we're going to have for the year. Now let's see what our resources are going to be in order to pay for that. One you're going to look at is, well, what's our beginning balance? What did we have at the beginning of the year? Because could be a quite large amount that's going to help you pay for those future expenses. Next item is going to be that revenue other than property taxes. Any miscellaneous revenue that you have, intergovernmental, state aid, that kind of thing, any charge for service revenue, that's going to help you pay for those particular expenses that you want to make sure you account for in your calculation which will be in your budget. And so that when you do that calculation, it's going to be right there for you. Help you what property tax amount that you're going to need to be able to collect. There are a few other items on here. I don't see these as often. You know, you got distributions from economic growth increment pools. If you have that, you'll want to make sure you're putting that into your calculation. If you have some taxes from prior years that just haven't been collected yet, but you're still expecting that to be collected, you would make sure you're including that as part of your calculation. That's all those items together are going to end up giving you the amount that you need to levy. Now, there is an additional piece here where you can actually levy an extra 5%, and that's going to be from delinquent taxes. So if you think that, hey, historically, there's been 3% of our taxes that we've levied just never get collected, for whatever reason that may be, you can actually bump up the amount that you're going to be taxing up to the maximum mills that you have to be able to cover that loss of that 3%. And you can do that up to a total of 5%. The next century code here is dealing with that interim fund. I've kind of already touched on this a little bit, but basically for any municipality, county, entity other than a school district, you are allowed to have that interim fund, that cash reserve piece within your budget. It can't be more than 75% of your appropriations. It can exceed what you believe is going to be expected to be paid for the first 9 months of the following year. One of the things we do recommend here at the office is to make sure that it's a little bit vague in Century Code of whether current appropriations means the year that you're currently in or the year that you are going to be budgeting for. So we have our file set up to make sure that you're not going over either of those. So you can do that calculation for both periods just to make sure, hey, we're within that 75 limitation for both periods and you won't have any issues. If you do want an opinion on that, please go and talk to your own state's attorney or any lawyers that you may have. I do have on here a list of century codes for various entities. There will be on our website a pamphlet of century codes that might deal with your organization. Like I said, there's just so many, it's hard to cover all in one day. So a couple of key points here. The city and park levy budget information, it's very, very similar to what I was talking about for the county codes. And so the budget file, if you were to go to our website and pull the city budget file and the county budget file, they almost look identical. They're going to have different budgeting laws within them, but they're going to look very similar. If you're a school district, I think DPI actually provides a budgeting form for you to use. I do have that listed on that pamphlet that'll get added to our website. And then if you're just one of these other entities, just make sure to go and look at those particular codes that I have up there. If you are an entity that's not on here, make sure you consult with your own attorney for your entity. Look at the century code that deals with whatever entity you are and see if there's anything within there that deals with budgets for your organization. All right, so we have the state auditor's office budget file. The website's up there that you can go to find the forms. This is the next couple slides are going to be snips of what this file looks like. There's multiple tabs. When you open it up, it's going to be a very big file. Don't get overwhelmed. Just kind of take it one tab at a time. The very first tab on there is budget laws. That's just going to have some laws that affect your particular entity if you're a county or a city. It's going to have some budget file tips on there. This is tab that's up here is just the cover page. It's going to have you can enter in who your commissioners are. I think it's like the items in blue that you can update yourself. A lot of the items in here auto update. So like I put this as a December 31st, 2024 budget. So I updated one segment where it was just for 2024, and that updated every area of the entire budget to say that it's for 2024. Or if there's any 2023 items in there, it'll show that as well. There's a table of contents. summary tab, and that summary tab is going to show what the levies are that you're going to be, how much property tax that you're going to want. And then there's a budget chart, and the budget chart's just kind of cool just to show, hey, here's kind of our distribution of where our expenditures are going for the year. And the real meat of the not the presentation, but the budget file are going to be these G1, G worksheet 1, 2, 3, those tabs, and they're set up in a way where G1 means general fund. There's going to be other tabs in there for the special revenue funds that you may have, debt service funds, etc. This particular tab here is set up for a county general fund. Your max levy is 60, so you can update that if that ever changes over time, if new laws are passed. And then you can input at the top what your taxable valuation is, because that's going to help dictate how many mills that you're going to need to collect. There are some formulas within here where you can see in green where it says within limitations. It's going to pop up and say, hey, stop, you're over your max that you need to do. You need to go back and adjust something if in fact that you are over. If it's green, that's great. That means you're within your limitations that you need. This particular tab here is setting that up to calculate those mills, just like that 571531 code that I was talking to you guys about earlier. It has your final appropriation in it, which that's going to come from the G1, G2 tabs. Everything in here is basically linked to your budget file. So you don't have to mess with much on this particular tab. It's really for informational purposes for you to help you make that best decision of, are we within our maximum limitations? And one item that you can change is that cash and investments. It will be auto-calculated, but if you have a better estimate based on new numbers that have been rolling in, you can update that amount. We have seen it a lot of times where that number is just zero, and that usually doesn't happen. You usually are going to have some cash at the beginning of the year, so you want to make sure that you do have a number within there. Let's go to the next tab, which is this is what the worksheet looks like if you're doing your budget. You have 3 columns there. The first one is your actual. So since this is for 2024, your first column is your actual 2022 amounts. That was last year. You're going to want to make sure you look back at your last income statement, your trial balance, make sure you're putting in the proper amounts to make sure you have a great starting point for where you're going to estimate your future revenues. There are lots of categories on here. You'll see at the top left, there's taxes. So that's going to be your different types of taxes. You'll notice on that far right column for general property taxes, you don't actually put anything in there because that's what's going to be shown on that first tab that I was showing you, where it's going to help you calculate what your taxes are going to be. If you end up putting that in there now, that's going to definitely throw off that formula. There's a couple categories of various revenues that you could have under intergovernmental revenues, license permits and fees. You might have some state aid, some oil and gas money. You'll want to make sure that you put those in your appropriate categories. We have some items in here for you, but if you have other revenues, just make sure you add the rows, add that information in there, do whatever's going to work best for your organization. And then at the bottom right, it's going to end up totaling all of your revenue. Similar for the next couple, but this is for your expenditure tabs. So this is your G3 through G5 worksheets. It's same exact concept. You're going to have your various functional categories, general government spending, public safety spending, that sort of thing. One key point on here is that bottom right. So you're going to see down there, you have your balance January 1st, your transfers in, transfers out, and your balance January 31st. That initial column, that actual column, make sure you're putting in your actual fund balances in there to make sure you're giving yourself the most accurate starting point that you can, because that's going to directly affect what your ending balance is then at the end of next year. And then all those numbers, they get pulled back. They come back to this tab. You can insert your cash reserve in there If you want, remember it's a max of 75%. We do have over to the far right a little worksheet there that's going to help you determine if you're over that max. It is all formula based, so that's going to pull from that budget file that you have, and you won't have to worry about it too much other than just to make sure that you're in the green, you're within those limitations. It's going to pull all your estimated revenues, all your estimated transfers in, and it's going to help you calculate how much property tax you're going to need to collect from the citizens in your area. So with that, there are a few common issues that we have seen. Now, I want to say I've been giving this presentation since late 2020, maybe early 2021. And during that period, we had quite a few budget findings that we were giving out. And since then, we've seen a vast improvement on this front. And that's what we want to continue to see, and hope that any of you who are seeing this for the first time can take these items and bring them back to your organization so that you don't have these potential issues if you were to get audited by us or by somebody else. So one of those big ones is having a high interim balance. If you are putting in an amount over that 75%, that's against entry code. And so you'll want to make sure that you're within that 75% limitation, make sure you're within the green. One that not everyone thinks about is your transfers. If you are budgeting, say, in your general fund, and you're going to budget a transfer out of $100,000, well, that transfer out's going somewhere. So there's probably another fund that needs to have that transfer in. And if you don't put that transfer in the other fund, you're now causing yourself to have more appropriations in the general fund, which is going to cause you to potentially levy more taxes. But since you didn't put it in to the special revenue fund or whatever fund it was supposed to go to, you are going to also collect more taxes for that fund than maybe you needed to. So just make sure you double check those transfers. Now, there is situations where where you're transferring money out of the road and bridge fund to a capital project fund. Well, capital project funds don't need a budget. That's one thing in Century Code. If you saw at the very beginning, you needed to have that budget for your general fund, for each special revenue fund and each debt service fund, but it's silent on the capital project funds. So if you have a transfer to those funds, then you're going to have an imbalance of your transfers, but at least you'll be able to support that particular item and say, when someone asks why there's an imbalance of transfers, you can say, hey, it's going to this fund. This fund just doesn't need to have a budget. I've talked about this one already, but it's having that year-end cash not have support, or a lot of times what we've seen is it's plugged. So either it's plugged as zero, it's plugged as $1 million, $2 million, and there's no reason for it other than it gets the entity's budget to the way they want it so that they can levy the amount of taxes that they were anticipating. But there's no actual support for that amount, and that's definitely something that you're going to want to have when you're doing your budget, so that if we come and ask, if a citizen comes and asks, you can say, hey, this is really how we calculated our beginning cash balance. Lack of support, that kind of goes in with all of this, but that ties into two for expenditures. So if you are putting amounts in as a future expense, but you really don't have any reason for that particular expense, that might cause an issue, especially if it's big dollars. Or if one good part for support for expenses in particular can be historical numbers, that can really be your reason for supporting your future numbers, because historical data definitely helps drive what's going to happen in the future. But if you're say you have gravel as an expense line, and each year you're just having $25,000 in gravel expenses, and then all of a sudden next year you're bumping that up to $2 million. That could be, there could be a good reason behind having that $2 million expenses, but you're going to want to be able to show that to somebody of, hey, here's kind of our road plan. We know that we have a lot of gravel issues coming up. This is why we're budgeting for that amount. You don't just want to start plugging numbers to get your budget to work. And the last one that we've seen, and this doesn't happen as much anymore, but it's not having a budget. It's where someone is just saying, so maybe submitting to the county auditor, hey, I just want you to levy the max. They don't have really a budget to support why they're wanting the max amounts. And that can be problems for various reasons, but definitely if you don't have a budget, then it's going to be tough for you to explain to taxpayers how and why you spent the money the way you did. A couple of budget tips. Use prior to actual amounts as your starting point. Those budgets at the end to make sure you just have all the elements. If you use our file, it should be there, but it's always good just to do a double check. Make sure transfers balance like I've talked about. Double check those formulas, especially if you start adding rows and things into the budget files. Just make sure those sum functions are still working and intact. We are human, we do make errors from time to time. So just double check that before you finalize that budget. Ensure your support for that estimated cash agrees to the budget. A couple more here. Check that interim fund calculation. Again, if you use our file, that's going to do it for you. Work with your department heads. They can be a great resource for you. They're going to know what the needs are of their departments. They're going to be able to provide you with the support that you're going to need for why they're asking for the amounts that they need. So make sure you work with them. It'll help also relieve a little stress from your own shoulders if you're the person putting together that final budget. And then review those revenues and expenditures at the end. Just make sure you didn't miss anything, especially on the revenue side. That's definitely where things can be missed pretty frequently. And last but not least, use the file that's on our website. We put that together for you as a resource. There's one on there for counties, there's one on there for cities and parks, and then we have one for other entities. While there are a lot of century codes out there, if you use the file that's on our website, it really, for the most part, should cover you for a lot of those. Even if you're a park district or an ambulance district, those budget files really should help cover you on those items. But again, make sure you just double check your own century code just to make sure there's not something missing. And the last kind of tip that I have for some of you is maybe you've gotten to a point where your fund balances are getting a little bit high, and the reason for it is because a capital project that you had budgeted for in your general fund or in your road and bridge fund, it just didn't come to fruition. You didn't get the permits in time, the contractor wasn't ready yet, so it's going to actually roll into the next year. Well, what you want to make sure that you do is there's kind of two options for you. If you already know about it during the budget time, you can budget for it again in your expenses, but you're going to want to definitely make sure then that your estimated cash is updated, because you want to increase that estimated cash then if you're not really going to have that expense. So that way your starting point is higher, so that you're not double taxing someone for the same project year over year. The other option, and this is really the one that our office recommends, is to have the board, if you really have a project that's going on, have the board commit those funds and transfer them out of whatever fund they were in to a capital project fund. Because once you've already budgeted for those expenses, you can move them out. Once they're in there, it's now set up so that you don't have to do a budget for it. So whenever those expenses do finally happen, it's there, it's ready to go. We only recommend that though if the board truly is going to commit those funds and they're going to use those funds on the particular capital project that they are committing them for. That, I don't know, Callie, is there any time for questions, or are we right at the deadline here?
We are out of time for questions this round, but there were a couple that we'll ask during the Q&A session. So we'll hop right into John's here in just a minute.
All right. Well, if any of you do have any other questions, you can always feel free to contact me. Thanks, everyone.